All right, hello everybody. So basically we just got Tesla full self-driving v14.1.7 and we just got it last night. I really haven't tested it all that much, but I figured this would be a good time to do kind of a raw drive and stop at a couple places and kind of get an idea of what feels different from 14.1.4. We did not get 0.5 or 0.6. We went straight to 0.7. So we're at the supercharger now. We're going to roll out, and I'll just kind of talk you through where we're going and what the car's doing. I'm going to keep it in standard, and I will adjust as the drive goes on. So here we go. And I'll keep the navigation on, and we're getting a nice camera wash as soon as we pull out, which is nice. So this should be interesting. We're actually going to head on to 83 North, and in order to do it from this particular, if we were to take a right there, it's interesting that the car actually changed its mind, but you're actually going to have to kind of cut a U-turn here, and the U-turn is actually illegal at this light. This is an issue that I have pretty frequently with full self-driving. I've detailed it before. It just kind of does some weird stuff, especially with the navigation. It looks like it's actually going to turn left at that light and then come back out. So it's not the most ideal thing, because you can actually just, let's see what it does here. It's actually going to go out a little bit and then go in and turn around. You can actually turn left straight out of where we were parked at the supercharger. Take another left and it'll put you right where you need to be. I'm not really a huge fan of doing this, but we're going to let the car kind of do its thing and let you guys see what it does in its natural state. So it looks like it's going to turn into this business park, go down, turn around, and then we will get on 83. So let's see what it does here. It looks like it's a little stumped here. Yep, okay, so I'm going to actually go ahead. I'm going to get it on the right track here. I've said in previous videos that I've recorded that what's been really disappointing about FSD is it seems like the navigation really never improves, or improves slightly. It seems like it did recognize that U-turn is illegal, so it chose not to perform that. So that's a plus, I guess, because it has tried in the past, and I've had to kind of abort it. So we're going to turn right here. This is Leader Heights Road. I'm actually going to let the car do some city driving. York City's not a huge city, but I feel like a city is a city when it comes to traffic. Generally, you tend to kind of come across the same sort of scenarios, whether you're in a big city or a small one. And, you know, York has its traffic, and it's relatively busy. It's not as busy as driving through Philadelphia or Baltimore or Pittsburgh per se, but it definitely does have its challenges. So we're going to take it down there, let it do its thing in the city for a little bit, and then we'll go from there. So we're merging onto I-83 North. I-83 spans from the city of Baltimore to the city of Harrisburg. So you actually jump on 83 in Baltimore or Harrisburg, you take it north or south, and it's kind of a straight shot. This is an exit I've probably only taken 5 5 times in my life, despite living here my entire life. So this is exit 15 business. This will put you straight into York City, right up by York Hospital, right onto George Street. If you're familiar with Baltimore, 83 turns into the Jones Falls Expressway. I guess 83 in York turns into George Street. It's kind of the same thing. So pretty interesting. Another thing I've kind of complained about a lot, if you've watched any of our videos, is on the highway, previous iterations of full self-driving weren't as considerate in terms of lane switching, especially with passing on the left. And in Mad Max mode, you know, it's kind of an anomaly, a little bit of an outlier, I guess, but Mad Max will pass on either side of the road. It really has no regard. And I like to use that in Maryland because it kind of matches the driving style down there, but in Pennsylvania it's definitely a little bit more relaxed. I think most people would feel that way. As you can see, we're traveling 69 in a 55. We're on standard. This is where the expressway ends. I'm not really super upset with this speed, but this is kind of where the conversation of the speed profiles comes into play. And you know, I posted something on our X account yesterday that I don't really know if self-driving will be solved within these next 2 or 3 generations of humans. I just think there's entirely too much of a subjective nature when it comes to driving, and what's too fast and what's too slow. I just kind of feel like, to a certain extent, you know, the speed and the nature at which people drive, and even at which they're driven, is kind of subjective and sort of opinionated. So that's kind of where the speed profiles of, you know, there's been a lot of discussion on those over the past few weeks since they've been implemented into the self-driving suite. So left turn signal on. It actually thought about going and then sort of turned back into the lane. Eventually went, so no harm, no foul there. So this is right at York Hospital, is over to our right, and the city really doesn't begin until you get up a little, you know, you get through these next couple lights. So I'm interested to see how it handles some of these lanes up here, because some of them are a little bit more challenging than others, but I've always been sort of impressed with how it's handled things. Really great job here getting back over into the correct lane. That's kind of what I mean with, it'll be interesting to see how it handles some of the lanes in the city. I like that it came over to the left side of the lane for that pedestrian who's on the shoulder. I think it's always a good thing to give them a little extra space, and it's done a good job there. So we're actually going towards Stage Deli, which is on this road of George Street. It's kind of an intermediary. I just kind of wanted to put it in there and then cancel it once we got close, because the original initial destination, the way it wanted to take me, is just not a way I was super comfortable with. York City's definitely not a bad city by any means, but it has its areas, so I just tend to avoid a handful of streets. It wanted to take me down one of those questionable areas, so I chose to pick Stage Deli so it would avoid that and stay on George. And we're going to do some driving out of the city as well. I'm interested to see how it handles Market Street, which will actually take us from the city all the way to our next destination. Be a lot of lights, some good pedestrian traffic. It should give us some pretty interesting scenarios here. Let's Traffic's pretty regular for York City this time of day. No complaints thus far. Here is what most people know as the square of York, the intersection of George and Market, and this is kind of where a lot of the restaurants and stuff are. There's a lot of foot traffic up here. The courthouse is also up here, so just from personal experience, I know that when people have jury duty, they tend to wander the streets up here, so there's a lot of foot traffic during the day. I mean, obviously there's people living and everything like that, but you have all the courthouse foot traffic up here as well. I think the cities like this are going to be a really interesting challenge for full self-driving in the future. I've had some really interesting, excellent. So we're going to have FSD actually stop for the pedestrian and let them through the crossway. Really great job there. As you can see, the other two cars weren't super concerned about that. Then we have a green arrow here. Great job. But as I was saying, I think that some of the instances in cities will be a very good challenge for self-driving cars in general, simply because I think this goes for anywhere, not necessarily just a city, but I think that a lot of places, there's very aggressive driving. I know that there's been a handful of times in this city in particular, because I've lived here all of my life, so I think there's been a handful of times where I've been really shocked by what people have done. I've had people, in the middle of the day cross me on 2 lanes of traffic. Once again, another great job by FSD to wait for this pedestrian and do the correct thing other than these other 2 cars. Excellent job. But I've been traveling on a road like this and had somebody go on the left side of the road and pass me and come inches from clipping my car. And so I think there's really interesting scenarios of super aggressive driving that you really can't train for. I know that billions and billions of miles of data are accumulated, but it's almost kind of funny to think about how challenging some of the scenarios are and just how spontaneous some driving scenarios can be. So I think it's going to be interesting. So the nav is actually taking us straight here. We could actually turn left right here and we'd be on the same street, but I'm going to let the car kind of do its thing. I'm not really going to complain too much. I'm just going to let it kind of go, and hopefully it gets out in front of this group of people here. Pretty tight alleyway here. So, gonna be you can see we have some trash up here. like the car's almost kind of stumped by the, not only the foot traffic, but the trash in the road here. Looks like it was being more cautious because of the pedestrians, which I do like. Pretty rough roadway back here. So this is going to be interesting because the routing really makes this more difficult than it needs to be, because if we just would have turned left on Market, we'd avoid this double intersection, or excuse me, we'd avoid this traffic coming from both ways. So this is actually going to put us right back out where we were initially. We went straight through this light before. This is the square again. So could I actually turned left at that other light and been on this road that we're going to end up turning right on here? So sometimes it's kind of interesting to see what decisions the car makes in terms of navigation and routing. I can bring this down here. So now it's going to take us to the Sam's Club of York, PA. I'm actually going to allow it to go in there and park and handle a lot of the congestion that's in that parking lot. That should be kind of interesting. So recognize this car, this pickup up here, sitting out in the middle of the road. I like that it got in this left lane. I'll tell you, it's really impressive to see the car do the correct thing and see human drivers do the incorrect thing, especially with those pedestrians is what I'm speaking about specifically. There's two examples, or you know, all the data that we see that shows that autopilot enabled vehicles are safer to travel in, they're involved in less accidents, fewer accidents, all those kind of things. I think it's also interesting to note that, you know, those kind of things, which are the right thing to do, stop for foot traffic and crosswalks, those kind of things aren't always executed by human drivers. And not that they're always executed by full self-driving either, but we just saw two examples of FSD doing the correct thing when human drivers did the incorrect thing. So these are all things to take into account. So the nav is saying it's about 11 minutes to the Sam's Club. We'll actually pass an on-off ramp, so you know, kind of an interchange a little bit. There's a lot more lights. The city actually spans for maybe another couple miles down this way, and then kind of once you hit the I-83 underpass, you're kind of out of city limits. Let's see. Looks like it's recognizing that wheelchair as a bike. A lot of people ask me, or have asked me, what Amish buggies come up as in the driver viz, and usually it's a small box truck. Kind of hoping one day they do add Amish and horses and buggies, and I think that would be a really cool little thing just for local jurisdictions. So the Cars is doing a really good job of handling all this. This is not overwhelmingly stressful by any means, but you know, it's still less than typical, I guess. I mean, we have people crossing the street not in crosswalks and kind of going at their own fruition, I guess. Nothing too challenging, nothing too major, but, you know, there's so many unexpected things that happen on the road that it's good that the car is kind of handling everything with no real stress. So there's some traffic parked on the left side of the road there, and the car got over to the right side of the right lane to kind of make way for some of the traffic on the left. So there's some construction up here. We're in the correct lane, so no change there. Now we're getting in the left lane to get around a trash truck. Excellent job. I will say that with areas like this, where it's kind of stop and go traffic, if you want to call it that, I tend to keep it in standard or chill. I find that hurry tends to travel a tad too quickly. You know, Mad Max I really try to keep to interstates and highways, and I kind of judge things off of where I am at that time. So I don't really love to use it on highways. In Pennsylvania, it's just the style of driving isn't really aggressive enough in Pennsylvania. But once you kind of get over the Maryland line and you're on 83 South, you know, the driving is really night and day compared to Pennsylvania driving. It's pretty funny being this close to a state line, because things tend to be so different in terms of the style of driving. Mad Max is another car on the road in Maryland, whereas in Pennsylvania it almost kind of feels a little bit too fast at a lot of points. And I really enjoy Mad Max, and I really enjoyed it at first, and I still do really like it, but it's just not super applicable to a lot of areas around me. I would never use it in any sort of residential setting. It's just too quick. You know, this is kind of where my argument is with these speed profiles is, you know, I feel it's too fast, but, you know, there are people out there that probably think it's relatively appropriate in terms of speed, and you wouldn't catch me driving that quickly in certain areas, but some people might. It's just not really my style. So we could actually continue straight to get to Sam's Club. This is this is where I really don't have too big of an issue with the routing, is because there's nothing wrong with this. What it did at the supercharger, I think, is incorrect. You know, it went out the wrong way, and I guess wrong is subjective there, but then you turn it to a business park, and then it just kind of got stumped and then pulled over and turned itself off. So this, on the other hand, this is, you know, you avoid some traffic lights this way. It's actually a more direct way straight into Sam's Club, instead of if we would have kept going straight there, we would have had to hit another light and some other things. So, you know, this is definitely the easier way. That was actually an intersection where I would have expected some stuttering, and I think I actually have had stuttering in the past at that intersection, so I'm pretty happy with that there. I know that, you know, Tesla really hasn't said too much about when it thinks it'll actually resolve that stuttering, other than Elon saying 14.2, but I'm not really sure when 14.2 will be out. Based on how fast they've been shipping these new versions of FSD, you know, it could be a month. So after it parks, I guess we'll throw in another destination and we'll see how it handles some other things. I have some ideas. Go straight through this light, come to another light, and then Sam's Club is straight ahead. It's actually, we can see it. Although it looks like it's going to turn left and go around, which, once again, I guess that's more of an opinionated thing. I would personally just go straight in, but there's nothing wrong with what it's... Alright, and we're off. I apologize for the ghoul. My fiance painted it, and I promised her I'd put it on my rear view mirror, so now that Halloween's over, I guess I could probably take it off. So you could go straight here, and you'd be, I mean, literally the Sam's Club is straight ahead. So it's kind of interesting it's choosing to go around and park what I guess would be the other side, but I'm just going to kind of let it do its thing. These interesting situations when there's two cars turning in opposite directions, coming from opposite directions. It's like a game of chicken. Last time I actually came around this turn with FSD, it put its turn signal on, and you can only turn right. I think it's kind of funny. Okay, so it's going to turn right here. We'll see where it finds a spot. Let's see what it does here. Okay. Looks like it's just going to pull in here, which I'm more than fine with. Good job parking. Alright, we've got a handful of new destinations. And we're going to let FSD 14.1.7 drive us there. All in all, I'm pretty impressed. Definitely feels a lot smoother and a little bit more convincing with things. You know, I think the stuttering is really my biggest pet peeve with V14, but I really haven't come across it too much in this ride here. Even these little approaches where it stops at a stop sign, then inches forward to get better visibility of the turn and the oncoming traffic. It just feels a lot smoother. There's no pumping and stuttering or any sort of hesitation. So that's really encouraging. So it kind of seems like things are getting better. I actually got an email from somebody recently that, I wrote an article saying that, Tesla was really trying to confront that issue, and somebody kind of misinterpreted what I said, and they were kind of challenging what I wrote. I know that Tesla's is confronting that issue. They're addressing it and they're trying to resolve it. I don't think it's fixed, at least not yet, but based on what I've seen so far out of this ride, I think it's definitely better. I think if you go back to 0.3, 0.4 even, that's when I had a lot of the issues with that stuttering. It was a lot of it happened at intersections, but it also happened when it was overtaking things like mail trucks, overtaking things like slower traffic. Look, the Amish is a great example of that. They usually pull off. They still continue to move forward, obviously at a much lower rate of speed as a vehicle, but they kind of pull over to the shoulder, and you pass them, as long as you have enough of a gap to pass them. I'm going to go out on a whim here and say we probably won't make it through this light in this cycle. It's a pretty quick left turn light. It looks like it's actually going to put us onto Route 30 and then bring us off at the Helm exit. So we're going to get a little bit more highway experience here. Although I haven't had complaints with highway operation in a very long time. I don't even know if I ever have. Thinking back to V13, highway driving was super impressive. Even before I had this car and I had the weekend demo drive, I can't even remember what version that would have been. It was sometime in maybe April or May. So, it was definitely V13, obviously, but not sure which version, in terms of how far along in V13 it was, but it did some really great things on the highway, especially with merging, handling construction traffic, getting into the correct lanes, all those things. It just did an excellent job. My fiance, she's a little more hesitant with this kind of stuff than I am. I just go right in and does a great job, and she's definitely more hesitant. But even she was very impressed by what it did in past versions. She's still impressed by what it does, daily when we're in this car. So, we have our complaints. Obviously, she has more than me, but we did make it through that light in one cycle, which is good. Now we're going to go ahead and merge onto Route 30 East. You can actually take 30 East all the way to Philadelphia. You can also take it out towards Pittsburgh. This is Lincoln Highway, named after Abraham Lincoln. You would also hit Gettysburg on Route 30 as well, which is why it's named Route 30. So one thing I think that FSD doesn't get a lot of credit for is the way it handles, I guess I could say, less than considerate drivers. So, good job there. It was pretty hesitant. It had that turn signal on for a while, and you could feel it kind of trying to make it into this lane. And then it actually waited till the car behind me flashed its lights and gave us the go-ahead. So, pretty impressed with that, as the semi on the right side of the highway almost runs off. But back to what I was saying, you know, I think FSD does a really great job of accounting for drivers that aren't super considerate to others. So, you know, when we were merging onto 30 there, that semi-truck could have gotten into the left lane and allowed us to merge into the right lane, and it just didn't. It just drove beside us. And they're not obligated to yield, so legally there's nothing wrong. It's just more of a, you know, make it easy for the traffic that's merging onto the highway. So, you know, it just kind of slowed down, waited for the semi to pass, and then merged and got in the left lane and passed. You know, it did a really great job there, and it does that a lot with cars that are not super considerate with others. And you know, that's one thing I've always been really impressed with is, you know, my dad always used to tell me that you really have to drive defensive, and you really have to expect the unexpected and expect other drivers to do really stupid things. You know, driving on 83 South and 695 and, you know, the Baltimore Outer Loop, you know, his whole career, his whole life, you know, he's seen pretty much everything you could probably see on a highway. You know, people do really, really stupid things on the road, just not thinking, and you have to be prepared for it. And I think FSD does a really, really good job of avoiding a lot of those kind of instances. So I've always been really impressed by that. I don't think it gets a lot of credit for that. I think, you know, its overall performance, just driving and handling normal navigation, is what it really is highlighted for, and not necessarily all the other things that kind of go under the radar that people don't think about. I don't think those things get enough recognition. Good job at coming to a complete stop off of this and then merging. So now this is a continuation of Market Street, Route 462. Back when we were in York City, when we turned right at the square after going through that alley, that was a continuation of this road. So now we're coming through the town of Pelham. Pretty happy with everything, all things considered. You know, if you want to call the navigation mishap at the beginning an intervention, I guess you can, but I haven't had to take over for any real safety reason, and I usually don't, especially with routes like this. But I think when you kind of throw a bunch of different scenarios at FSD and just seeing how it responds and how it goes through all the different processes, especially with city driving. You know, city driving's super stressful. I avoid it at all costs. I mean, I go to Baltimore a lot for Orioles games and Ravens games, and you know, I never drive in the city. It's pretty rare, actually. You know, I took my father-in-law to an Orioles game in September, and I'd had this car for like maybe 10 days, and I took it down there and parked in a garage, and I was paranoid, looking at Sentry mode every inning, making sure nobody was dinging my car, you know, in a parking garage. But, you know, generally I try to stay out of city driving, but you know, I think that FSD is obviously a really great way for people who, you know, don't have the nerve or, you know, even the want or the need to drive in the city. You know, FSD really takes that stress out of it. You know, if somebody wanted to go downtown to meet their friends for dinner or catch a show or whatever it may be, you know, from start to finish, your car can take care of that for you. You know, at least I would say probably 97 or 98% of the time. Good job there to get over to that right side of the lane and just touch the white line just to get around that truck. But you know, I've said it in the past. You know, my sister is a few years older than me, and she doesn't drive. She's just never wanted to drive. She's kind of always been frightened by vehicles and cars, especially being in control of them. You know, so I'm really excited for FSD to be solved, because it'll be a great way for her to be less reliant on people. And, you know, if she wants to take Uber, she can just either buy her own car and use it as a robo-taxi, and then, you know, have the car make her money as the robo-taxi suite will do, and you know, that'll be the way she gets around, or whatever. I mean, hopefully one day she does learn to drive, but if she doesn't, then, you know, this is obviously an option that people like her will have. You know, and it's also great for people that have disabilities, people that are epileptic, you know, people with any very, you know, any condition. You know, they'll have a way to have reliable transportation and not really have any responsibility is just huge. So Standard's actually traveling 50 in this 45. We're going to just push it up to hurry and just see what happens. So it's in hurry now. We're going down a hill, so I'm not really going to take this increase in speed. You know, it's not really going to account for too much. Seems like it's kind of traveling the same sort of rate as Standard would. Now it's starting to pick up a little bit. You know, through here, I'm not super concerned with how fast it's traveling. This is more than appropriate. Now, we're going to go ahead and turn right onto Cool Creek Road up here. Then we'll actually pass Cool Creek Golf Course. Interesting thing about Cool Creek Golf Course is, let's see, it'll be the 1, 2, 3, 4. The 6th hole runs parallel to Cool Creek Road. And there are some really tall pine trees along the fairway there, but, you know, if you hit the ball a little higher, or you have a hook of some kind, you know, I've had my buddies hook their drives into this road here. So the fairway just runs parallel to this road here, and these pine trees are pretty much the insurance policy that the ball doesn't go out into the road. So this will actually be a pretty good stretch of roadway to test Mad Max on. It's uphill, it's 2 lanes. I'm just gonna wait till I get past this little business down here on the left. Sometimes a cop likes to sit in there. I just don't want it to take off too quick. Alright, so now we're gonna pump it up into Mad Max, see what happens. 45 through here, I think that's definitely a speed limit I have an issue with. I think it should be a little quicker. So Mad Max 62 in this 45 here. It's not outrageous. I've manually driven faster than this on this road. It's maybe 65. I don't think I'd go much faster than that, but I've been passed when going 65 up this hill here. Once we turn right here on a Mount Pisgah, I'm actually going to just back it right back into standard. There's some... Actually, let's leave it in Mad Max. We're going to leave it in Mad Max and see how it does. These roads are a little bit more windy. They're a little more back roadish feel. So if it kind of gets out of hand, we'll take it down, but I'm going to see what it does. I think there's been a lot of controversy about Mad Max. You know, I read a lot of the headlines, and you know, it's all about ignores speed limit and purposefully speeds and ignores the law. You know, I don't know a single person that doesn't go over the speed limit when they drive. I know 80-year-old women and, you know, 95-year-old men that still have their life. My grandfather drove till he was 87 years old. And that's just a corn stalk. Okay, nothing there. But anyway, my grandfather drove until he was very, you know, he's much older. You know, human beings go over the speed limit. Speed limits in a lot of instances are kind of ridiculous. You know, all the people that write those headlines, I'm sure they don't travel under the speed limit or at the speed limit everywhere they drive. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. You know, I think there needs to be a conversation about, you know, performance vehicles that have speed modes that encourage spirited driving. You know, there's no restriction on that, obviously, reasonably. But you know, these BMW M3 competitions and Tesla with plaid mode and ludicrous mode and all these different modes. I mean, those things are geared towards driving fast and having fun on the road. And, you know, it's just kind of funny to see people, like, complain about it that much. Model X towing in front of us. It's funny to see people complain about it because those same people aren't perfect either. I mean, everybody drives a little bit quicker than the speed limit. I don't think what Mad Max does is preposterous. I think that at times it goes a little fast. I don't think it's ever put me in any sort of, you know, mood where I've thought I was in danger or anything like that. We are coming up on a residential and it's pretty tight, so I'm going to back into standard. But you know, I don't think it's wrong if somebody wanted to stay in Mad Max through here. It's just my personal preference, and I think that's what's important to note is, you know, people can choose the profile they travel with in these cars. It's, you know, it's not fixed where, you know, if you're in the middle of the drive, you can't change it. You know, I know a lot of people have complained about the lack of ability to set a max speed with V14, and now it's, you know, it's fixed to the speed profile you choose. But you know, if you're not comfortable with how fast the car goes, just back it into another mode for a temporary amount of time. And you know, I think that's one of those things with the early releases of V14, at least with you know, 14.1, until it gets to 0.2, I don't really think there's going to be a whole lot of refinement there, because you know, it's, although you can't set the max speed, you can set the profile. And if you're not comfortable going as fast as a certain profile goes, then back it off. I know that's maybe a little bit more maintenance than people want. I can totally understand that argument. You pay a lot of money for FSD, and, I think a lot of people try to nudge that, they're paying all this money, they shouldn't have to do that, but it's still supervised. It's still something you have to pay attention to. It's still something that you need to keep your eyes on the road, because ultimately you are responsible. So, if you're not comfortable with how fast or how slow a certain speed profile goes, then, just change it. I change speed profiles not super frequently, but, when the car's not doing something I like, I change it. Huge dip there. I've always been really impressed by how FSD handles these dips. There's a lot of turns and different roads where, they really should be fixed, but you just kind of have to graciously go over the transition to the next road or whatever. That's one example. There's some more drastic ones around me that, that are worth mentioning, but, those kind of situations, I think most people would anticipate the vehicle, would probably anticipate the vehicle not slowing down all that much and just kind of driving, and, it's a little rough when you go over those bumps and all those things, but, FSD's always done a really great job of recognizing those changes and slowing down and taking them at an appropriate speed. So this has the landfill on our right here, and so you get a lot of semi trucks, dumping trash and other things over here. So there's some pretty interesting situations here if you come at certain times of the day. Lots of traffic in and out of these places. Genuinely have no complaints of 14.1.7 based on this drive. I guess we've been out about 40 minutes or so, and my only real complaint was the navigation at the very beginning and the navigation in the city, but obviously it wasn't stumped by that. It just chose that route, and I was more than okay with it. It's not really a super valid complaint, but I guess it could be considered a complaint, but it's not. It didn't do anything wrong, so I don't have any real problems with it. I do think that, in instances like that where, maybe the driver knows the routing a little better, I feel like it should be easier to kind of just touch a street or touch a road and be able to kind of override the nav choice in that particular instance. Kind of stuttered there a little bit, but I think that was more precautionary because of that strange intersection, so I don't really think that would count as a stutter in terms of what's been typical for V14 thus far. I think that was more of a precautionary move. So we only have about 2 minutes left of this drive. But all in all, just very impressed by everything so far. I'm excited to do some more spontaneous drives with it. Tomorrow I'll be recording a 2-hour drive from my house to State College, Pennsylvania, Penn State University. Tomorrow's the start of wrestling season, so I'll be up there for the match. They're wrestling in Oklahoma tomorrow for anybody that cares, but more about the navigation. So that'll be kind of interesting because there's 15 different ways to get to State College, and I would have to imagine that it's probably going to pick the route that would take us close to downtown Harrisburg. It's not really the best route, but it's kind of the most direct in terms of if you didn't have a GPS, this is kind of the way that if you were to just look at signage, it would be the way that you would go. I'm not sure if it'll take us that way, but I guess we'll see. So we're just going to turn left into this little township parking lot here, and that'll be it. So it shouldn't be too much of a challenge, but we'll let it do its thing. Oh, actually, it's going to park up here in this lot. Okay. Going to choose to back into this spot. Not really lines here, I don't think. Why it's choosing to park right over this is pretty interesting. This is actually probably my biggest complaint of the whole drive is this parking choice. But other than that, that was a bit of a demo on full self-driving 14.1.7. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you like this style of video, let us know and we'll make some more of them. Thanks so much.